Well, hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, part 2 of our Toys and Joys 1929 Ford stake bed truck. Well, like I said at the end of last week's show, this is meant as a tutorial to give you basically the confidence you need to try one of these models for yourself. Last week we just finished up the frame and the axles, and well, you know what, let's head over to the bench and carry on with the build. Well, where do we start this week's build? Well, I think the next thing that I would like to make, still following along on the same page of our plans, will be the bumper. This front bumper is not a difficult piece to make, but you really want to think about this now. In order to make it successful, to make it so that it looks good, you want both pieces to be identical. So the best way to do that, in my opinion, is to stack cut them. And for that, I have cut a couple pieces of 1/4-inch thick maple. I got that 1/4-inch thickness from this front view of the bumpers. Each height of each one of these sections measures 1/4 inch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the pattern for this bumper, which is this section right here, and I've photocopied it. You don't want to cut up your plans. Make photocopies. Everybody nowadays has a scanner on their computer or has access to a photocopier. So photocopy it. And very simply, I'm going to coat the back of this here with a little bit of spray adhesive. I'm going to let it set up for 3 minutes and then rub it down onto masking tape, which will be applied to the top piece of our maple. Once that is done, we will use masking tape to tape these two pieces tightly together so that they cannot move, and then we will head over to the drill press. Well, the very first thing that we want to do, if you look at the plans, you will see that these bumper pieces are held together with a 3/32 diameter dowel. And for that, we need to drill a 3/32 hole in each side. So I've center punched this hole, so I'm just going to drill both pieces at once. Now in stack cutting, we don't want these to move because we want to cut them both at the same time. So if I cut into here and start cutting away, I've already weakened my connection of these two pieces by cutting away the tape joint here. So we're going to drill a blade entry hole and do this as an interior cut. Where I would suggest drilling the hole is in the absolute least noticeable place on the bumper. And I think that's going to be right in the corner here where this round section meets up with the bumper's face. So we will drill one blade entry hole right there. And then we can take this over to the scroll saw. Now, because we're cutting two 1/4-inch pieces at once for the bumper, I have increased my blade size a little bit to a number 5. You can use a number 3, just take it a little slower if you want. But what we're going to do is very carefully now, do not push this, because if you push a compound cut, what's going to happen is your blade will deflect and it will make your pieces different sizes. So just take it very slowly and cut around the entire perimeter of your bumper pieces. You also want to stop periodically just to make sure you still have good blade tension. If you lose the blade tension, that blade will deflect and make your pieces different sizes. And now we can take this over to the bench and see what we've got inside. And if you took your time and were careful with it, inside we should have two identical pieces of front bumper. Look at that. And they are identical. Because you used masking tape on the maple, this pattern here will be able to peel right off without leaving any residue from the spray adhesive. And then all we need to do is give this a little bit of a sanding. Again, the sandpaper on the MDF is your friend here. But now we need to join these together to form the complete bumper. Well, let me show you a little trick of how you can do that. Well, what I have done is clamp these two together, just light pressure with a 1/8 inch setup block here in between the two pieces to give us an equal and even distance between them. I also have a couple pieces of 3/32 dowel cut, and we need to glue these dowels in place. But it can be a little tricky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert this one dowel just like that, just part of the way into both pieces, and then stop. And at this point now we can apply the glue. We will apply a little bit in here in between our two pieces on the dowel, and a little bit here at the bottom. And then what we can do now is spin our dowel into our bumper pieces until it's situated where we want, and that way it'll give us some glue into both joints here. There we go, just like that. And now we can get in there with a cotton swab and clean up the squeeze out that's there. Do not do the other side until this one is dry, because if you're clamping on this with your spacers in between, the pressure is going to pop this glue joint. So make sure that it's dry. Also, if you don't have setup blocks, just use a piece of 1/8 inch thick material. You can just cut that over at the table saw and make your own spacers. So that's about it for the bumper on how to get it glued up to make it look good. We now want to glue our bumper to the front, because although the glue is dry on both of our 3/32 dowels, it's still a very, it's fragile. It's very fragile. We don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I've used spacers to lift the body of this up. We're going to apply some glue to our bumper here and put it in place so that it's centered. I've placed some marks there on the bumper pieces to help me align it. And once we get that in place exactly the way that we wanted, we're going to take a clamp and very carefully, remember what I said about quick grips, liking to shift things, just give it some light pressure. You don't need a lot. That is how you will glue on the front bumper and let it set up, and that should give you pretty much the perfect spacing all the way across. Well, normally at this point in the build, I would build these fenders, but unfortunately I just checked the rack and I don't have the exact stock that I really want. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit and I'm going to start working on the cab of the truck. And for that, what we're going to need is some 1/4 inch thick material. For me, I'm going to use cherry. Well, in order to build the cab of this, you need to cut the pieces. But if you look here at the drawing and if you pay attention, you're going to see that there's some pieces that are missing. But if you search around and do cross-referencing, you'll be able to find them. And what I'm referring to here is the cab floor. You can see that it's very clearly labeled here, cab floor, but there is no piece showing you what to do for that. You can also see it down here. So how can you cut it? Well, you can get the thickness of the piece from this side view here, and that would be a 1/4 inch thick. You can look here and get the shape of it, and this is not square, but how do you know these angles? Because actually, if you take a measurement from here, this, I believe, is 3 3/4 inches across the back of the cab, but this is considerably smaller. Well, what you can do is if you look on this side, you can see that those side pieces are cut to a 2.5 degree bevel. Sorry, if those there are cut at 2.5 degree bevel, then this piece here, being the floor, must be cut at an angle on the sides of 2.5 degrees. And if you cross-reference and get all the information, you will end up with a piece that will fit the cab floor like what you want. So from here now, what we're going to do is cut the back and the front panels of both of these pieces. And for those pieces, you will also need to cut the edges here, your end cuts, at a 2.5 degree bevel. For that, we're going to set the angle of the table saw blade and rip them using our ripping fence in order to achieve that angle and get the measurements that we require. One thing you want to keep in mind, when you have your floor here built and you're happy with the size of it, you can compare it to your drawing. Do not build your cab walls and that sort of thing according to the measurements that they give you here. There can be slight discrepancies, so build it to the measurements of the floorboard that you've cut. Everything will be based on this floorboard, and as long as it fits perfectly on here, regardless of what these measurements say, then you will have a perfect looking cab. And with the front of the cab and the back wall of the cab matching perfectly now with that 2.5 degree angle here on both sides, we're not going to cut any more pieces just yet, because now it's time to do any detail work we need to do on these. And for that, it includes the window at the back of our cab. So I'm going to use my Incra rule and a circle template to draw out the window, and we'll take it over to the scroll saw and cut that out. So at this point now, in the front panel of the cab, we need to drill a hole. And we can see here it's 3/16 diameter. It is also on an angle of 45 degrees. So there's no need to get crazy here. All I've done is I've taken a scrap of oak, I have clamped it in a hand screw clamp at 45 degrees. We're going to hold it as relatively square visually to the table and to the bit as what we can. We're going to hold it in place, and very carefully and slowly, that's the key here, slowly we're going to drill down through. If you go too fast, that bit is going to grab and try to wander. So just take it slow and get the 3/16 hole drilled in the front cab section. So what we're going to do now before we cut any other pieces is we are going to glue the front and the rear boards of our cab onto our cab floor. We'll clamp it in place and let them dry. While we're waiting for those to dry, of course, we can work on the side panels of the truck, and that's what we're going to do next. Well, I've cut a couple panels for the side doors, both the left and the right. You want to make sure that you're making opposite sides here so that you don't have two left doors or two right. But I've drawn out everything that we need here. The door handle hole, the window. These are just a little bit larger than what the drawing asks for. And that's because if you really wanted to, you could do like the drawing says and cut the front edges at 2.5 degrees and all that jazz. I don't want to be messing around with that. I like to keep it simple. So what I've done is I cut it a little bit bigger, and I'll show you how we're going to deal with that in just a little bit. But what we need to do first is, if you look at the drawings, there is a groove that runs all the way along the sides of our door, and they are talking about putting a kerf in there from a bandsaw blade. Wow, I don't know. I really don't like that way. So what I'm going to do is I am going to actually use a router bit, and the very first thing that I'm going to do before I cut the windows or do any other drilling is I'm going to route those two lines. Well, I have a 1/16 diameter router bit set up in the router table, and I have it set to a height of 1/16 of an inch. I do have a scrap of 3/4 MDF here that is clamped up against our fence, and the reason for that is no matter how small the gap is in between here for the dust collection on this part, there's always the possibility that a piece this small could dip into that gap and ruin our routing. It has to be perfect, it has to be straight. So I'm just going to make one quick pass here, and I'll show you what we end up with. Now it is a small router bit, so chances are that kerf is going to be plugged with sawdust. So you can just take an awl or whatever you have and just gently clean it out. And there you go. There is a perfect 1/16 diameter, perfectly straight kerf. We will do the same thing in our other side door for back here. Then we will reset our fence and run the dado in the other side, or our groove, and then I'll see you when that is done. All right, check that out. Look at how perfect those routes are. They look absolutely fantastic. They'll add a great little detail to this piece. So at this point now, we can center punch the hole for our door handles and drill a blade entry hole and take these both over to the scroll saw and cut out our windows. Okay, and now with those pieces made, we can now glue them in place. We're going to line up the front edge here, and while that little section there will line up and there'll be a little bit of an overhang, I'm not worried about it. We'll deal with that after, as well as the little small overhang at the back. We will also deal with that later. What you want to be sure of at this point is that this door is sitting completely flush to the bottom and that it lines up completely flush with the back of the truck. So apply some glue, and you can clamp this in place if you like, but I like to do one door at a time so I don't have to worry about two panels sliding. I'm just going to glue them in place and let them dry up. Well, sometimes it happens, right? Sometimes you pull a bonehead move and you push too hard on one piece or another and you end up breaking it, like what I've done here. But this is completely repairable. It was a clean break, so don't get frustrated at this point. This sort of thing happens with these models. They're very fragile at certain points in time until we get all the pieces and support pieces glued into place. So all I'm going to do here is just very carefully, we're going to glue this back into place. And hopefully when it is all said and done, you're never even going to see that break. It's all a matter of how you glue it together and all the pieces that cover it afterwards, because we will have a roof that is going to glue on here that will strengthen this. So there we go. That is now glued into place. We'll use some cotton swabs to clean it up, and when it's dry, we can sand it so that it's perfectly flat and flush, and hopefully that will never get noticed or never get seen. So it happens to the best of us. Don't let it worry you. Don't fret. Just glue it back together and move on. While I'm waiting for the cab and my little oops to dry up, I'm going to work on the bench seat for the truck. And I have 3 pieces of walnut cut here. They're all 1/2 inch thick. 2 of them are 1.5 inches wide. 1 of them is 1.25 inches wide, and they are all 3.25 inches long. Now, if you look at the prints, they show you these crazy angles here that you need to cut and that sort of thing. Although they don't tell you specifically the angles, it shows angles here, and that is ludicrous to try to do something like this for basically for a design or a element of the design that will never be seen other than looking in through the windows and getting a glimpse of it. Not to mention what they've depicted here does not really give a realistic representation of what the seat would be. So I'm going to do mine a little differently, and what I have is I have a scrap of walnut. I've made sure that this edge here is square to the bottom, and we are going to take the riser part will just remain flat and square. We don't need that. But for the seat and for the back of our bench seat, we will take these pieces, and with some double-sided tape, we are going to adhere them to this scrap of walnut. Once we get them adhered, we're going to take them over to the belt sander and shape them however we see fit until we get a shape that we think looks good. And you have to remember that this seat is being glued to the back wall of our cab. So those pieces don't have to mate perfectly because they will be hidden in behind the doors. So you're better off to sand it for a more realistic representation than to try to get the angles to match. So once you get that sanded and done, you should have something that looks like this. And this is a much better representation for the seat, and we can glue this in when the time comes, but for now we need to turn our attention to finishing off the actual shell of our cab. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do with our dry cab is we are going to level out the front here where we have that bit of an overhang from our angled or our lack of angled front pieces. So place the face down on your sandpaper and just gently run it back and forth. And before too long, you'll have the sides level with your centerpiece. So now what we want to do is I have taken a 1/2 inch circle template and I have rounded off these corners. You can see here that I've placed a round over at each one. For that, we're going to take it over to the belt sander. You'll want to make sure that your table on your belt sander is perfectly square to your belt, and we will gently, and I mean gently, shave off those corners on the belt sander. And then we can give it a very light hand sanding, and this piece then will be done. And there you go. There is the cab pretty much finished now. These back sections are nicely rounded. This is nicely flat. Everything is looking absolutely fantastic. Even my repair actually looks really good. There's one little rough spot right there. I'll give that a light sanding, but we can now take our bench seat and glue it in place, just centered on the back of our cab. Well, if you have been following along with me here, you should have something that looks just like this. The cab is not glued to the frame. We're not going to do that till we get all the front end pieces assembled and ready to go. Guys, this has been a lot of work just to get the cab and the seat and all of that done. I've been out here for 8 hours working on just that alone. So I guess one of the other secrets to getting a successful and great looking model is take your time. And that's what we're going to do with the rest of this series, and that's what we're going to do with the rest of the model. But that is going to have to wait for another week because we're out of time for today. Guys, again, there is no rush on these things. I don't care if it takes 20 episodes. That's what we're going to do to show you guys and give you the confidence to make your own model like this. This is a lot of fun, it's a lot of work, and it can be frustrating, as you saw with I broke the piece, my own stupidity. I put my thumbs in the wrong spot, gave a little bit of extra pressure, and snap, just like that, it was gone. But I was able to salvage the pieces and make it work. So there will be frustrating times, but you can overcome that and make the model work, and you learn from it as you go. What did I learn? Don't put your thumbs there. Guys, seriously, this is a ton of fun, and I know that most of you at this point in time probably just scrolled right through to this section here to hear what I have to say at the end. And that's okay as long as you stop throughout the process and maybe pulled a little bit of information here and there out of it. I don't expect, or it would be unrealistic of me to think that everybody's going to watch this entire series all the way through. But if some people or a majority of people can pick through it and pull out certain bits of information and learn from it and get something positive out of the show, then it was worth every bit of effort that it took me to make it. I know that there will be some of you that will be making this model and think, crap, how do you make the bench? Well, you can scroll through, find the bench, just watch that section. I don't care. As long as you get something out of it, as long as you learn, that's what it's all about for me. If you haven't already, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Click that bell and then you won't miss notifications of future episodes of the show, like part 3 of this build. Guys, this has been a lot of fun. I hope that you've enjoyed the content so far in this series. I hope it's giving you the confidence to try this for yourself. And more importantly, I hope you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another Alternative Tuesdays.